So here we are in the second project that I want to show you guys today of Suffer in Silence. This is actually the finished project. This is the project where the masters come from, where the free masters come from, 100% done. So all looks pretty much the same, a bit neater. The main thing I want to talk about is there's a few more audio files hanging around here, which I want to talk to you about soon. And yeah, I'll just play a little bit. So it sounds just a bit tighter. This is after a mix down, so everything's just a bit cleaner, nicer sounding. And yeah, so the thing I want to talk about is the way that I produce when I finish the arrangement of my songs, when I'm happy with everything. I don't know how to make it any better. I've finished everything. The arrangement's done. All the sound design is done. I like to bounce things out to audio, and so you can see here that I've bounced out some of these snares I was talking about. Bounced out this tambourine that was coming out of Addictive Drums. So now this snare is just always the same. There's no variation in the transients. Nothing's going to change. No plugins are going to change it. It's just always going to be the same. It's going to be right on that transient there. So yeah, the reason I do that is there's a couple of reasons, but I like to do this with drums because especially when you're generating drums from synths and plugins like Addicted Drums or Superior Drummer, when you start piling on effects and stuff, sometimes the plugin delay compensation is not done properly, or there's a bit of something happens, and things sound a little bit different each time, and then the transients get a bit smeared or whatever. So the reason I like to do this is because I can get all the transients exactly as I like, lined up right down to the kind of sample. And it sounds kind of ridiculous, but it actually makes a difference when you start bouncing everything out and lining everything up, and you want to get every snare hit, every transient coming through precisely, cleanly, and you don't have to worry about anything changing. Everything's just in audio, and it'll just be like that forever. And it's you can also do certain things with audio files that you can't do when things are running in MIDI and so forth. So yeah. So now everything's basically audio. The drums are almost the same as they looked the last project. There's a few less tracks, deleted some rubbish, deleted stuff that was muted. And the bass now is actually what I want to talk to you mainly about because as you can see here, I've grouped the bass into my subs and my mids. So I've bounced out those Reeses and those basses we were talking about before from Massive, and now they're just all audio files. And what I've done here is put one version of the basses here, and I've low passed them all at about 150 Hertz, and also done some other low mid EQing, and then I've also limited them quite hard to even them out. And I think this is quite important because especially with Vintage Warmer, it's great because you can add actually add some thickness and some more harmonics to the sound, especially with the speed control, and also limiting them kind of solidifies them, makes them a lot more solid, gives a little bit less fluctuation in the volume, which is pretty important for subs, especially in drum and bass. So we'll just listen to that. So that's what the subs are sounding like at the moment. Also, just to note, I have 140, everything under 140 is just monoed in this track. So I pretty much always just have this on my master. And then we've got, if we look at the basses below, we've got the mids, which are the same audio files, the exact same audio files, except here they have been EQ'd to cut out the bass. So now we've got these two layers. I've got the subs here with the tops here. So if we just listen to these tops, so this is the mono channel, just and on top we've just got a spread fizzy channel, and then you add them all together, and it gives you a lot more control as when it comes to mixing in these sounds, which is quite important in this track actually. So yeah, that happens there. All the bass is split up, and these bass edits that come in. Same deal, just low pass them, limited them, and then their top layers are here. And that's the whole, you end up with a nice composite of the whole sound. You might notice here there are some annoying little cuts in the tops of the main bass sound, which actually sound incredibly annoying when they're by themselves, but the reason for that is I was actually having some trouble getting this snare to come through properly in this section. So what I actually did was cut out some minuscule sections of this bass in like a 64th note section of audio when the snare lands, just to give that snare transient the actual space that it needs to come through, because I mean it's very minute, but if you have this here, then I mean when you're playing this with the snare you actually can't hear these breaks at all, so it's just wasted space really. And if you need to get that extra little bit of headroom to make sure your snare frequencies are coming through, then that's the little trick you can do. Figure out what your ear is not actually going to be able to hear when drums are playing, and then just cut it out. I've actually also done it here as well, because there's so much. This is like a really loud point of the tune. There's a lot of stuff going on here. I really want this snare to pierce through it, so I just cut out a little segment of the bass there as well. So you can hear when the snare plays, you can't even hear that little gap there. So yeah, that's another handy thing you can do when things are in audio. You know, obviously you could also pitch and reverse stuff like this, and do all sorts of things when things are in audio, so that's useful. And yeah, so I highly recommend people look into doing that. It's especially useful with synths, because depending on what kind of patch you're using with your synth, you know, you might have lots of detuning and chorusing and phasing and reverbing and things which just, you know, make this sound different every single time. So when it's in audio, it's never going to change, which is useful. And yeah, so I've just grouped all these tops, a little bit of limiting just to kind of glue them all together, level them out a bit, and here I've done some notching. These notches are actually for this is the fundamental of the kick that we looked at before. This 130 Hertz peak, just to ensure that that is really coming through and not being smothered by the bass. And this is one of the couple of snares that are in the tracks, fundamental, and this is another one, I believe. So when these snares are playing, I really want them to be heard and not any of the harmonics of the bass. I want the snares to take preference there, to kind of give them the headroom where it's possible. So yeah, there's a few these synths here I've actually kept in synth form, because I don't really care if they change a little bit. They don't really have transients that need to be preserved or be sample correct. It's kind of nice actually if they just change a bit. I've actually frozen some of these because my PC is just not going to be able to handle them, not being able to play them back properly at this rate. But I mean, whether they're frozen or not doesn't really matter. It's not worth bouncing them out to audio, I don't think. So yeah, everything at the moment is like kind of a bit neater, a bit tidier. And this would be the stage, well, I've already done the mix down, but this would be the stage where I would do the mix down of the track. So when I've got pretty much everything in audio, there's not that much automation left going on, I would do a save as, and I would then go to the mixer. I'll turn off all the master processing first, actually. Go to the mixer, and then I would just do the mix down. I would just zero every track, bring everything down to 0, all the tracks down to 0 except for the sends, pretty much. And then I would start with my kick, and I would go to the drop, and I would loop like the first 16 bars of the drop. I would just I would loop the first 16 bars of the drop, have everything muted, and then just start bringing in the kick. I just bring it into kind of an arbitrary level. So here I've just started -6, so to give the whole track some headroom, because I'm going to be using the kick and my snare as my anchors for my mixed out. So if I get them at a certain volume, I can base everything else around that. So I'll bring in the kick, I'll bring in the snares, get them level, and then I'll start bringing in the other percussion things, just fading them in, all the while listening to the kick and snare. And I'll do this for the whole drums until I've gone through the whole drop, or the whole track really, and make sure I've not left anything muted. And then I'll start bringing in the subs. This is another useful thing, because having this bass sound split up into these subs and tops is really useful, because you can, as I said before, mix them in separately. So I'll just start with my drums will be sounding something like that, and then I'll have the subs at 0, and I'll just be looping a section, and I'll just bring them in. Actually, I'll turn off this and we can see. A lot of the time I'll use the spectrum to get a rough idea of how loud it has to be, because subs can sometimes be quite tricky, but I mean generally it always kind of looks like this. You got the lowest point of your track and your highs a lot of the time kind of the same. So I'll just keep doing that for all the tracks, bring in the tops as well. And yeah, this is all without a limiter, of course, but I'll just turn this limiter back on just for the sake of demonstration. And yeah, as we can hear, the bass in this version of the track is a lot cleaner than the previous one. The last version was quite boomy. There were a lot of lots of low mid content in those subs, which I actually ended up notching out, because when you've got this break playing here, like these drums are actually taking up quite a lot of the quite a lot of stuff going on in the mid range here, so the bass doesn't actually need to be that busy in a way. If you listen to all the bass, it actually sounds quite thin, but when you mix it in with the rest of the track, it ends up sounding quite nice. So yeah, it's all just about I really like to focus on how would you say, carving away sounds which don't need to be there to create the product which sounds nice in the end. So it's all just about fitting in things and making sure you don't have things doubling up in frequencies and all that sort of stuff. So I mean, the way I'm thinking about it is like I've got this bass here, and then I've got this higher section, and I've got the drums, and all of that stuff together. The drums, I've picked all these samples based on their frequency content, where they fit in the spectrum. So if you do that carefully throughout the process of a whole track, you should end up with something sounding very full and big. And yeah, just making sure to EQ everything. Be really specific with your EQing, make sure there's nothing stepping on anything else's toes, and yeah, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I guess lastly I can talk about just a bit of the arrangement of the track. So we've got this kind of theme which plays for the first 32 bars. Almost the same actually. It changes a little bit. There's like some of these melodies pitch up and pitch down a bit to keep it interesting. And then we've got this other section where the stab and the pads come back in from the intro, and then it leads into this other section. Oh, this section. Where this lead is kind of a variation of the first lead in the first part of the drop, and the whole track kind of key changes down a fifth, and before coming back into this reprise, I guess you could call it, which is pretty much the first section but with this added bass sound in here. So it kind of, the drop like establishes itself, has a bit of a break, and it goes, it modulates a bit and then reprises itself back to the original thing. So it's actually kind of like a very basic, I don't know, AABA kind of jazz format, or even just uses, you know, some very basic kind of classical theories, I guess you could call it, if you want to be really stupid and technical. It's really just basic songwriting, I guess, as well. Just some nice things to think about, where you kind of introduce an idea, have a break from it, reintroduce the idea but a bit different, and then yeah. And then the second drop is pretty much the same but just rearranged. And it just has a few little edits here and there to kind of give it, just to keep yourself interested, keep your ear interested, so you don't feel like you're listening to just something that's been spat out of a computer. And yeah, so that's kind of the basic idea of the arrangement of the track. And yeah, like I said, those ideas, some of those ideas that come into the drop are actually established in the intro. These stabs. These stabs and the pads come in here, and the stabs cut out, and these other melodic stabs come in, and yeah, so it's all just kind of try to keep it nice and organic and flowing and interesting. And yeah, I guess lastly I just talk about the way that I just do some master processing to my tracks when they're all done. I like to just use Ozone because it's got a whole bunch of useful stuff in it. I'll just use I'll use the harmonic exciter, put it into mid-side mode, and give it some little bit of distortion on the side bands to widen the tune up, also a tiny bit in the mid-range, the mid part of the sound to give it a bit of sparkle. I'm just doing a straight mono down of everything under 140 Hertz, and then I'll just limit. So here this is actually quite limited quite hard because there's quite a bit of headroom in this track, so to make it up it's been limited quite hard to get it up to standardized level, I guess. And no other compression on the master, because I feel like sometimes I do put a little bit of glue on the master with a compressor to bring some things together, but I feel like if I can identify that problem is there, I can just go into the track and do it myself in a more specific way on a group or on a track. I don't need to do it on the master, so I don't usually do that myself. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So I think that's just about everything that you guys would want to know about this track. That's pretty much how I like to produce most of my tracks. I have this method, I guess, which I've developed, which seems to work a lot of the time. And yeah, most of my tracks kind of end up looking like this. I do the same type of thing for these basses, splitting things up and bouncing things to audio. And yeah, I hope you guys have found it useful. I hope you guys have maybe learned something today, and hopefully you guys can apply some of these things to your own production. And yeah, thanks for tuning in, and go check out my Plasma release. Cheers.